Chapter 27 of Captain Bill McDonald, Texas Ranger, A Story of Frontier Reform. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Captain Bill McDonald, A Story of Frontier Reform by Albert Bigelow Paine. The Wichita Falls Bank Robbery and Murder. The absence of Captain Bill and his Rangers from the Panhandle was construed by Kid Lewis as an invitation to rob a bank. He selected the City National of Wichita Falls for his purpose and, with a partner named Crawford, rode up to that institution one day about noon and, entering, demanded the bank funds. Cashier Frank Dorsey, failing to comply with that demand, was shot dead. H. Langford, bookkeeper, was wounded, and the vice president of the bank escaped by having in his left breast pocket a small case of surgical instruments. This deflected the ball which otherwise would have entered his heart. The robbers then secured whatever money was in sight, about $600 in gold and silver, ran out the back door, mounted their waiting horses, and galloped away. The citizens were by this time alarmed, and a number set out in pursuit full speed. There was a running fight, during which Lewis's horse was shot, but an instant later he was clear of it, and, leaping behind Crawford, the two went plunging away double until they met an old man driving into town with a single horse. This they appropriated forthwith, leaving their pursuers a good way behind. Still further on, they crossed Holiday Creek and came to a field where a man was plowing. They now abandoned their blown horses and, at the point of a gun, took his heavy Clydesdale team and once more dashed away, making for the Wichita River. Their pursuers gained on the clumsy animals and fired several more shots at the fugitives, then decided to return and organize a posse, which they raised in short order. This posse followed the track of Lewis and Crawford beyond the Wichita River to a place where the robbers had taken to the thick brush overgrowing the river bottom. Here, the trail was lost. Captain McDonald, returning from the Fitzsimmons-Maher contest via Fort Worth, had got as far as Bellevue in the adjoining county when he was met by a telegram containing the news of what had happened that morning at Wichita Falls. He immediately wired the authorities at the falls to have horses in readiness for himself and men. The Rangers reached the city about 2 in the afternoon, and mounting the horses already waiting, dashed away in the direction the robbers had taken. With him, Captain Bill had Rangers McCauley, Harwell, Sullivan, Queen, and McClure, the tried picked men whom Lewis and Crawford had been most anxious to avoid. The horses were picked, too, for speed and endurance, and went at a wild, headlong gait, almost too headlong for safety. A small creek that had become a bed of mud lay across the road, and Captain Bill's horse, stumbling on the brink, sent him headfirst into the soft mixture, which literally daubed him from head to foot before he could get on his feet. His men thought for a moment that he was killed, but he rose, spluttering and swearing, wholly unhurt, though fearfully disfigured, and with no time to remove his disguise. Instantly mounting, he galloped on, a sight to behold, the others respectfully restraining any tendency to mirth. Presently they met the local posse coming back. The posse had given up on the chase, but was able to furnish information. Captain Bill and his Rangers learned where the robbers had disappeared and pressed on in that direction, the posse following. It was now getting toward evening and would soon be dusk. It was desirable to make an end of matters by daylight, if possible, and the Rangers wasted no time. They picked their way rapidly into the thick undergrowth of the bottoms, and suddenly, at a bend of the river, discovered the Clydesdale horses tied close to the bank. Their riders were believed to be close by, and the Rangers expected to be fired on at any moment. Without waiting for any such reception, they charged in the direction of the horses with no other result than that Ranger Sullivan broke a stirrup, fell, and, with a fractured rib, retired from action. Lewis and Crawford had abandoned the horses, and their trail led down to the riverbank. The Rangers also left their horses at this point, for it was hard going. McDonald now took Queen and Harwell, one on either side of them, their guns in readiness while he gave attention to the trail. The light was getting very dim where they were, but Captain Bill is a natural trailer and followed the tracks without difficulty. Here and there they found stray articles which the men had dropped in their flight. Finally, the tracks led to the river, where it was evident the bandits had crossed. It was February, and the water was very cold. Captain Bill had not yet recovered from the terrible bullet wounds received in the fight with Matthews 2 months before, and was bent and debilitated, but he did not falter. With Queen and Harwell, he plunged in and waded the icy water chin deep to the other side. Twice more the trail led to the river and crossed, and twice more McDonald and his men waded that bitter current, holding their firearms above their heads, their bodies literally numb with cold. It was a severe experience, but, as Captain Bill said afterwards, it removed a good deal of his mud. McDonald now made up his mind that the robbers would be likely to cross a road that had been cut through the bottoms and head toward the territory, which they were evidently trying to reach, believing the Rangers would not follow them across the line. He called to one of his men, Ranger McClure, who appeared just then, a little distance away, to get all the force he could and guard that road, while he, McDonald, with Queen and Harwell, would continue to beat the brush and search carefully through the bottoms. At that moment, Lewis and Crawford were near enough to hear this order, and the realization that it was Bill McDonald and his Rangers who were on the trail gave them a sudden and more severe chill than the icy water they had waded. They had been heading for the territory, as McDonald suspected, but decided to change their course toward a creek that ran parallel with the river. On their way to it, they were obliged to cross an open field, and though by this time it was night, between 9 and 10 o'clock, a full moon had risen, and they were discovered by the men guarding the road and fired upon. They returned the fire as they ran, but no damage was done on either side. Meantime, McDonald and his 2 companions, nearly perishing with wet and cold, having come upon a house in their search, had stopped to try for a cup of hot coffee. At the sound of the shots, they rushed out. A horse was hitched at the door, and Captain Bill leaped into the saddle and hurried in the direction of the alarm. As he approached, he saw in the moonlight a crowd, the local posse, gathered on the little hill overlooking the wheat field where the robbers had crossed. The ranger captain fully expected to find the captured or dead bandits in that crowd, and called out as he came up, "Boys, where are they? Where are the robbers?" They pointed in the direction of some brush about a quarter of a mile away. "They went in that creek bottom over yonder." "Well, then, what in the devil are you all doing up here?" Somebody answered, "You must think we're damn fools to go in there after those fellows. Of course we didn't go in there, and don't intend to." "Well," said Captain Bill, "I'm going, and if any of you fellows want to go, come ahead, but I don't want any man that don't go willingly." Ranger McCauley had ridden up. "You can't get away from me, Uncle Bill," he said. The 2 loped off in the direction of the thicket, but presently found their way barred by a wire fence. Leaving their horses, they made a circuit around the enclosure, and soon struck what seemed to be a road leading into the bottom. Hurrying along, they came upon Ranger McClure, who had been in charge of the posse when the shooting had occurred, and had set out alone to locate the robbers. "Hello, Bob, where are they?" asked Captain Bill as he and McCauley came up. "Right over there, Cap. They ran in the brush over by the yonder big tree." "Well, boys, we've got to get them. We'll charge in there." They pushed rapidly into the bushes without further parley, McDonald heading for the tree, McCauley and McClure spreading out to the right. Captain Bill made straight for the big tree pointed out by McClure, his gun ready for quick service. It was a still, moonlit place, but brushy and full of shadows, and not easy going. The crack of Winchesters might be expected at any moment. Suddenly, the captain found himself confronted by a creek, and looking across, saw two men with guns squatting in the weeds. They appeared to be on the point of raising their guns to fire, but, with McDonald's appearance and his sharp command, "Hold up there!" made from behind his own leveled Winchester, they were unable to complete the action. Their guns dropped into their laps. They seemed stupefied. "Throw up your hands," was the next order. The hands went up. "Get up from there." One of the men found his voice. "We can't, Captain. Our guns are laying across our laps cocked. They'll go off if we get up." "Get up or I'll turn you over." They rose hastily, their guns sliding to the ground. "Back off there now and face the other way." They obeyed like soldiers on drill. Captain Bill stepped into the creek about 3 feet deep and waded across. He noticed a bag, doubtless containing the stolen money, and observed that the robbers had laid their cartridges out on a log for convenient use. At that moment, Macaulay and McClure came hurrying up, apparently ready to shoot. "Hold up, boys, it's all right," said McDonald. "I've got 'em." Macaulay and McClure waded across and assisted in searching the prisoners. A purse of gold was found in one of the men's pockets. The sack on the ground contained silver. "Now let's get out of this," said McDonald, "and get where it's warm." "You're not going to make us wade that cold creek, are you?" said Lewis, shivering. "Look here," said Captain Bill, "if you don't get across there and pretty quick, I'll duck you head first. You've made me wade water up to my neck all the afternoon." They crossed then, the 5th time in the cold water that day for McDonald, and made their way to where he and Macaulay had left their horses. Here they got a rope and bound the prisoners, their arms behind them. Captain Bill then called to the posse, still waiting in the road a quarter-mile away, listening for the sound of the shots that would probably bring down Rangers. "Come on, boys," he yelled, "we've got 'em." So they came lickety-brindle, but presently stopped. "Captain, are you sure you got 'em?" "Yes, I've got 'em, and I've got 'em tied. Come on, there's no danger now." The crowd tore through the brush to get over there, and some of them began abusing the captured men, declaring that they had murdered the best man at Wichita Falls, and furnishing a graphic outline of what would happen to them in consequence. What they said was all true enough, maybe, but the saying of it seemed in rather poor taste to Captain Bill. "Look here," he said, "these men are my prisoners now. You let them alone." He marched Lewis and Crawford over to Mark Boger's ranch, where they all got some hot coffee and something to eat. Boger also supplied a wagon in which to haul the prisoners. It was McDonald's first intention to take the men to Henrietta for safekeeping, but against his judgment he was persuaded to take them to Wichita Falls. He gave orders, however, that none of the crowd should leave, as he did not wish the news of the capture to travel ahead of them, realizing that a mob of citizens would be likely to gather. On the way to the falls, the Rangers fell into conversation with Lewis, and Macaulay and Harwell discussed with him the fight that he and Hill, Loftus, and the others had made that night in the dugout when Joe Beckham had been killed. Lewis explained how he and Red Buck and Loftus had managed to slip away without being seen. Then McDonald said, "Boys, how was it you didn't shoot me a while ago when you saw me coming through the bushes? You all had your guns cocked and ready, and you knew you'd be hung anyway if you got caught. You saw me first. Why didn't you shoot?" "Cap," said Lewis, "we thought you were out of the country and wouldn't get back before we could get to the territory. When we heard you giving orders and knew who it was, we lost our nerve, and when we saw you, we somehow got paralyzed." When the procession had arrived within a mile or two of the falls, Captain McDonald, realizing that someone had doubtless slipped away and carried the news, sent one of his men to have the jail door open in order that there might be no delay in entering. His suspicion was correct, for the news had traveled, and though it was then about 2:00 in the morning, several hundred men were congregated about the jail when the Rangers with their prisoners arrived. Captain Bill rode ahead and opened the way with his gun. "Give room here, men," he commanded, and the way opened. Lewis and Crawford were marched into the jail, Rangers Macaulay and Queen being left to guard the door. The prisoners were taken to cells, carefully searched, and locked in. Captain McDonald then descended to disperse the crowd, which had grown noisy and ugly in its demand for the prisoners, and was apparently making ready to attack the jail. Captain Bill addressed this assembly. "Boys," he said, "I reckon you all are my friends, and if you are, you'll go home now and go to bed. My rangers and I captured these men, and they are our prisoners. We've got them locked up, and they'll have a fair trial. You men didn't capture them, and you have nothing to do with them. They're unarmed now and can't defend themselves. But if you make an attack on this jail, I'll give the prisoners their guns, and we'll lick this crowd. I command you to disperse immediately. If you don't, we'll begin business right now." The mob dispersed. Some of the leaders wanted to call Captain Bill away to discuss matters, but he would have none of it, and cleared the grounds. Then, in spite of his wet, cold, weary condition and the terrible wounds received less than 3 months before, he stayed with his men on guard until morning. Then a message was brought to him that Hill Loftus had been concerned in the robbery, and that he was hiding in a dugout near town. Knowing that Loftus and Lewis trained together, Captain McDonald did not discredit this report, or suspect that it was part of a ruse to get him away from the jail. He ordered a horse from the stable at once and made ready to start. "Aren't you going to take your men with you?" asked the men who had brought the word. "No," said Captain Bill. "I want them to stay here. But Loftus is a bad man and will have the advantage of you being in the dugout." "That's all right. I can take care of him, but I do want somebody to come and show me the place." A man volunteered to do this and rode with Captain Bill to a dugout some distance away in the edge of town. The place was empty, but another man appeared just then who claimed to have seen Loftus leave a little while before, taking a northerly direction. Still unsuspecting, Captain Bill set out at full speed, but after riding 3 miles and seeing no sign of Loftus or his trail, he rode back to Wichita Falls. At the edge of town he was met by his nephew, Henry McCauley, with news that everybody who could get a gun had marched on the jail, and that no doubt Lewis and Crawford were already hung. Captain Bill did not wait for another word. A mob of several hundred men had gathered about the jail, wild with excitement, determined to have Lewis and Crawford and to lynch them forthwith. Suddenly, this multitude saw Captain Bill bearing down on them, his Winchester in position for business, and fury in his eye. "Boys," he called to his rangers as he dashed up, "have you still got the prisoners?" "Yes," they called back, "they're still in the jail." Captain Bill wheeled on the mob. "Now," he shouted, "damn your sorry souls, march out of here and get away from this jail, every one of you, or I'll fill this yard with dead men." He had his Winchester leveled as he spoke, and those who considered themselves in range made a wild, hasty effort to get into some safer locality. Captain Bill swung the point of his gun a little so it covered a good many in its orbit, and nobody knew when it might go off. They knew if it did go off, it would hit whatever spot he selected, and nobody wanted to own that spot. The crowd moved. Some of it hurried a good deal, and Captain Bill helped things along with language. He escorted the mob well into town. The ranger captain now prepared to move the prisoners to Fort Worth, but was notified by the district judge that this could not be done, that any attempt to do so would result in general trouble with the citizens of Wichita Falls. McDonald protested that the citizens had already shown that they were unable to take care of the prisoners in a legal way. The judge said, "I will appoint 25 men to guard the jail." "You mean you will appoint 25 men to keep me from taking Lewis and Crawford away?" McDonald said. "No, only to help you guard them. But if you have a guard of 25 men, you don't need the rangers." The judge argued for the moral support of the rangers. McDonald informed him that it was impossible for his force to remain in Wichita Falls, guarding prisoners, that other work was waiting for them, that there was already a requisition for them at Quanah, that furthermore they had been away from their headquarters for 2 weeks, besides being wet and cold and worn out from exposure and want of sleep. "Let the others go, Captain, and you stay," urged the judge. "Judge," said Captain Bill, You know I'm all shot up, and it's the first time I've rode any, and what with yesterday and last night and today, I'm about used up and likely to be sick. Now, if you can't take care of those prisoners with your guard, all right. If you think you can't, I'll take them to Fort Worth where they'll be safe. But I'm going to get out of here tonight unless you get an order from Governor Culberson for me to stay. It ain't far to the telegraph office, so only about 30 steps. You can go and wire him if you want to. If he says for me to stay, I will, of course. But otherwise, I'm going. I've done my whole duty now. When I get prisoners in jail and guarded, my duty ends. Your guard of 25 men with your local officers can hold that jail if they want to. I could hold it alone. No order came to the Rangers from Governor Culberson, and they left that afternoon when the local guard had been duly installed. That night, the mob once more marched on the jail, and in spite of the armed guard and the sheriff, deputies, and constables, Lewis and Crawford were taken from their cells and hung to telephone poles, close to the bank where they had committed their crime. Citizens of Wichita Falls complained to Governor Culberson that Captain McDonald and his Rangers had gone away, leaving the prisoners to the mercy of the mob. Culberson wired to McDonald, and receiving the facts in reply, commended him throughout. A reward of $2,000 for the capture of Lewis and Crawford was paid by the two banks of Wichita Falls. The local posse divided it into 32 equal parts, in which they generously permitted the Rangers to share. End of chapter 27.